A KGB special agent leaned over the railing and shook a metal container. Fine gray powder spilled into the dark water of the Biederitz River. The year was 1970. The current caught the ash, mixing it with mud and carrying it north. The Biederitz flows into the Elbe. The Elbe dumps into the North Sea. Within hours, the man who murdered millions became ocean sediment. He left no grave. He left no shrine. This was the physical end of Adolf Hitler. Decades earlier, his death smelled like gasoline and scorched bone. Soviet counterintelligence dug through the ruins of Berlin. They needed proof. The dictator dodged a trial by shooting himself, and his guards burned the evidence. To identify the charred mess found in the Chancellery Garden, the Soviets hunted down Kate Heusermann. She was the assistant to his personal dentist. They showed her a jawbone pulled from the dirt. She looked at the gold dental bridges and the specific fillings. The dental records matched the burnt teeth perfectly. The myth of a South American escape died right there in the rubble. But the body itself remained a problem. Soviet leadership panicked over the bones. A marked grave meant a future monument for fanatics. So they hid him. They moved the rotting remains from Buch to Magdeburg, burying the corpse in secret military compounds. For 25 years, the dictator laid under a paved courtyard. Then Yuri Andropov gave a final order. A KGB task force dug up the bones one last time. They brought wood, fuel, and intense fire. They burned the remains at extreme temperatures until the skeleton cracked and crumbled. They crushed whatever bone fragments survived the heat. They turned a tyrant into unrecognizable dust. And then a KGB agent carried that dust to the riverbank. He poured the powder into the current. The Biederitz swallowed the ash, dissolving the dictator into the freezing water. 25 years before the freezing river swallowed that dust, the escape began in the ruined garden of the Reich Chancellery. On April 30th, 1945, the dictator and Eva Braun locked their steel door against a collapsing city. Soviet assault groups were fighting just 500 meters away from the bunker entrance. While drafted teenagers bled out on the shattered pavement to buy him time, he shot himself to dodge accountability. There was no grandstand, only a desperate scramble by loyal guards to hide his quiet exit. They hauled the bodies upstairs, dumped them into a shallow bomb crater, and soaked them with 200 liters of hoarded gasoline. A tossed rag ignited the fuel while the guards rushed back underground. By May 4th, 1945, a SMERSH special task force started sweeping the blasted courtyard. Broken brick crunched loudly under the boots of the operatives as they navigated between jagged craters. They stopped at one specific pit to dig through the charred soil. The two corpses pulled from the dirt were burned entirely beyond recognition. The dictator burned in gasoline without a trace, leaving a perfectly empty grave behind. Yet his soldiers are being dug out from under tree roots to this day. The war officially ended 80 years ago, but fresh wooden coffins are still required every single morning. Out in the suburban forests, thousands of mass graves remain overflowing with shattered skeletons. Joachim Kozlowski and Erwin Kowalski step into the damp woods. Their boots sink into the soft earth. The search begins. A heavy excavator rips through the forest floor. It strips away exactly 50 centimeters of topsoil. Wet, dark mud sticks heavily to the steel bucket. The machine swings around. The bucket dumps the load onto a sorting screen. Inside that clump of dirt, human bones mix with rusted shrapnel. The men sift through the freezing mud by hand. They find human remains scattered at every possible level, from the shallow roots right down to old bomb craters. Allied aircraft pounded this exact ground in 1945. The bombs buried dozens of people instantly. The sheer blast pressure drove bodies straight down to a depth of 15 meters, sealing them beneath thick layers of clay and crushed concrete. That equals the height of a standard 5-story residential building. Kozlowski carefully scrapes mud off a broken femur. Dirt clogs the joints. Water dissolves the marrow. Topsoil hides the true scale of the suburban slaughter. The war stays trapped inside the earth. They have to dig deeper. Deep in these 15-meter craters, the Earth holds more than just nameless bone fragments. Joachim Kozlowski stands in the wet forest mud, carefully rolling a single white porcelain crown between his gloved fingers. The search team washes away 80 years of compacted dirt. The cleaning process takes hours. A worker uses a soft toothbrush to scrape the heavy clay from an unearthed jawbone. The white porcelain gleams brightly against the dark brown soil. This is the primary identification method. Military dog tags from 1945 have long since rusted into brittle orange flakes. The stamped metal numbers disappear completely. But human teeth survive the underground moisture. Kozlowski reads the dental work like a medical barcode. High-quality porcelain fillings instantly mark the skull as a German casualty. The Third Reich widely utilized advanced dental ceramics. This single glossy tooth narrows the search down from millions of missing files. The real identification process happens through the personal gear. The mud hides everyday civilian items among the shattered bones. A rusted pocket watch with a broken glass face, a cheap metal amulet engraved with a woman's name. The search team uses small wooden scrapers to peel the wet clay away from the artifacts. A distinct shape slowly emerges from the cold earth. It is a leather shoe, not standard military jackboots. They are small, civilian lace-up shoes, European size 35. These boots belonged to a child. The Hitler Youth drafted 12 and 13-year-old boys in the final desperate months of 1945. Over 40,000 teenagers were thrown into the defense of the capital region. The command sent kids wearing oversized uniform coats straight into the frontline trenches. The boys wore their regular school shoes to the battlefield because no combat boots fit them. Now those tiny shoes lie buried beneath layers of forest roots. The diggers frequently hit solid iron during these manual excavations. A standard high-explosive aircraft bomb weighs 250 kilograms. That equals the weight of a small passenger car, resting right next to a child's crushed rib cage. The recovery process involves peeling layers of dirt away from active danger. Unexploded artillery shells with fully intact fuses lie right next to the cleaned school shoes. 12 years old. That was the age of the traitors hanging from city lampposts. Those small shoes resting beside live artillery shells have been buried in the Halbe Forest since April 1945. The government turned its final rage against its own citizens. Thick ropes creaked under the weight of local teenagers. Military tribunals executed kids just because they ran from the incoming Red Army firepower. The broken streets belonged to impromptu execution squads. Anyone walking without proper discharge papers died on the spot. By late April, the capital turned into a slaughterhouse. Firing squads roamed the burning ruins looking for deserters. They killed without trials. Out in the southern suburbs, the trap finally closed. The German Ninth Army, along with tens of thousands of fleeing residents, hit a dead end in the Halbe pocket. The tight forest corridor trapped over 80,000 people. Artillery shells smashed into the pine trees. Wood splinters became deadly shrapnel. Falling timber crushed the terrified survivors below. The state offered no protection. It only demanded more blood from kids and old men. Pure panic replaced military order. Desperate civilians tried to break through the Soviet lines on foot. Machine gun fire cut them down in waves. Nobody stopped to collect the fallen. Advancing armored columns simply rolled directly over the dead. Heavy metal tank treads pushed human remains deep into the street asphalt. The bodies crushed under the asphalt outside the city were just a fraction of the total slaughter. Residents clutched kitchen knives. They ran toward the dead horses scattered across the pavement. Women and old men carved raw meat straight from the bloated carcasses while artillery shells landed nearby. This fight for survival consumed the capital. Before the war, Berlin held 4,300,000 people. The Red Army threw 2,500,000 troops into the final assault to take those streets. 100,000 German soldiers died trying to hold the crumbling blocks. Soviet forces lost 80,000 men just to fight their way through the rubble. 125,000 civilians died in just 16 days. They could not escape the heavy crossfire pouring into their basements. The violence reached its peak right before May 2nd. On that morning, the artillery fire finally stopped. A sudden, heavy silence fell over the smoking ruins. People pushed open the cellar doors. They crawled up into the bright daylight and stepped out onto the avenues. Human corpses and dead draft animals completely covered the cracked pavement. The heavy, sweet smell of rotting flesh baked under the warm spring sun. There was no food left. Hunger erased any remaining disgust. The starving survivors pulled out their knives again and cut into the decomposing meat just to keep standing. The final tally showed the exact price of the military operation. 1 million Germans remained on the casualty lists. The casualty lists included a massive civilian toll. These 125,000 citizens died under the fire that started on April 16, 1945. How did the city turn into a stone trap? At exactly 4 o'clock in the morning, 40,000 barrels fired at once. This sheer density meant hundreds of guns covered every single kilometer of the advancing front line. The mechanics of the bombardment wiped out any chance of hiding above ground. Soviet Katyusha rockets launched in rapid, massive salvos. They struck residential blocks directly. High explosive shells from 152mm howitzers tore through roofs and upper floors. The impact shattered concrete walls instantly. Multi-story apartment buildings collapsed inward within seconds. Heavy brickwork and shattered masonry crashed onto the pavement. Falling debris blocked the streets completely, trapping people inside their neighborhoods. The familiar layout of the capital ceased to matter. Escape routes disappeared. Residents fled downward into cellars and underground coal bunkers. They sought protection beneath the collapsing floors. But hiding in an ordinary house offered no physical safety. Heavy artillery shells easily penetrated the street layer. The intense shelling brought the remaining structures down on top of these shelters, sealing the exits tight under tons of stone. The basements simply became mass graves under the rubble. The civilians trapped under that shattered concrete were not protected by an elite military force. 1,500 battered German tanks sat entirely without fuel. Under Marshal Zhukov's command, 2.3 million Soviet soldiers prepared to breach the city limits. This attacking force outnumbered the remaining German garrison 3-1. The armored advantage reached exactly 4-1. 6,000 Soviet tanks rolled toward the capital's center. General Weidling, appointed as city commander on April 23rd, directed only 750,000 men. The vast majority of them were never regular troops. They were the Volkssturm, a hastily assembled civilian militia consisting of grandfathers over 60 and boys as young as 12. 6,000 heavy Soviet tanks advanced against pensioners armed with basic hand weapons. The defense of the capital simply became a method of disposing of its own population. A 12-year-old boy stepped out onto the ruined street. His issued wool uniform hung loosely over his thin shoulders. He gripped a single-use Panzerfaust anti-tank weapon. The cold steel tube felt heavy in his small hands. The firing mechanism required adult strength to operate. Down the shattered avenue, a 46-ton IS-2 tank crushed the debris under its wide tracks. He stood right in its path. He had perhaps 5 seconds to aim the warhead. If he missed, the coaxial machine gunner would cut him down. He was just a schoolboy, forced to halt a professional army with a disposable pipe. They had no chances. While 12-year-olds burned tanks on the shattered streets, their commander-in-chief sat deep underground, moving divisions that existed only on paper maps. It was March 1945, and the Soviet vanguard waited just 60 kilometers from the Brandenburg Gate. The Third Reich was collapsing into its own capital. But down in the bunker, the reality of the surface simply disappeared. The heavy thud of artillery shells was muffled by 8 meters of dirt and reinforced concrete. One man leaned over a massive situation map, sliding unit markers across the board to direct entire armies to counterattack. He planned sweeping flanking maneuvers to crush the enemy. even though those troops had already been wiped out weeks ago. There was no one left to receive the messages above ground. The radio operators blindly typed out detailed commands to empty fields and destroyed command posts. He signed the final offensive orders. Those signed papers from deep underground concrete rooms buried real people in the dirt above. Why do we keep digging through these suburbs today? To return stolen names. 80 years later, the war of heavy artillery barrages has turned into a slow, quiet war of shovels. Volunteer search teams sift through the damp soil around Halba. They scrape away layers of thick mud. They pull up rusted dog tags and broken dental fillings. We left the spring of 1945 behind long ago, but the physical reality of those bunker fantasies still blocks the spades of modern excavators. The maps in the bunker showed organized defensive lines. The dirt above shows the truth. It is not just a few forgotten casualties scattered around the capital. About 1 million unfound soldiers still lie trapped beneath German soil today. The generals moved imaginary divisions across clean paper maps. The direct result was a generation of kids shoved into shallow, unmarked pits. Every skeleton pulled from the dark earth forces us to look at the real price of blind loyalty. The dirt preserves the evidence perfectly. A rusted rifle barrel, a crushed steel helmet, a wedding ring trapped tightly under thick tree roots. You do not learn history just by reading about the famous victories. You learn it from the staggering, unrecoverable losses. You learn it from the tens of thousands of families still waiting for a knock on the door that never came. This is the permanent cost of a leadership disconnected from the streets. The top officials hid behind thick walls while the city collapsed. The dictator managed to escape the gallows. A river washed away his burned ashes in 1970. But beneath the old bomb craters of Halba, the leather boots of 12-year-old boys are still waiting to be dug up.